Axiom of Choice by Literally Mad Lad on AO3. Episode 12, Chapter 4. Curiosity kills a lot of things, like the mood. Katsuki didn't stop until he was in his den, heart racing. Instinctively, his tail coiled up underneath him. He wished he could bury himself underneath it and maybe dissolved into the cracks of the rocks. The most he could do was sink down into his bed of moss and collect fabrics, and forgets that he'd never done that. That was difficult to do, though, especially when his embarrassment prevailed into the following day. He couldn't admit of the fact that he was fascinated by Deku's human body, or that it had given his own body a reaction he was unfamiliar with. It was a tingly sensation that ripped down the length of his tail. He shivered as he flattened his hands just below the band of scales around his waist. The reaction was immediate and addicting, especially when his callous fingers edged closer to his pelvis. The scales raised around the taunt, ridging folding, and folded the dips of his hips. It had grown soft where his highest perindeal fin connected tissue merged with his tail. His fingers glided along the edge of his fin, his thumb hooking over the muscle wrapped around the base of his fin. It steadied a hand to his fingers, delved into the vein slit that ran along the edge of it. It was a foreign sensation, but the tingling of his nerves all led to a target right beneath his fingers. He pulled his hand back with a pulse hiss. He'd rather not tread any closer to that ledge, especially when he could still feel the cool metal of the surgical devices prodding every gill, fin, and pore on Katsuki's body. The limited exploration he had done on his own was tentative and often done with Deku in the assistant's supervision. Katsuki placed all through the day and into the night. He couldn't seem to wear down the tracks that had been laid in his head, so he continued to travel back and forth along until it was too lenient to continue. It would be another few days before Katsuki would return to the pool. The days he spent in solitude were morose and colored by a shift. His energy wanted to dull roar activity, but not motivated enough to spring loose, and this sensation barred him from seeing Deku out again. The discomfort he had created pulled him at ease, and before long, his tail turned black. His scales had never turned such a color before. It was far different from the matty, translucent gray of his scales when he was malnourished. This was a stark charcoal that blended in with an equally dark surrounding. When he returned to the pool, it was with hesitance. Not completely camouflaged, he managed to linger for several minutes before Deku ever caught sight of him. Kachan! Deku cried, and before the idiot could stutter out a useless apology for how they left off last time, he noted Katsuki's tail. Your tail! Did something happen? Are you okay? And an unintentional croak vibrated up Katsuki's throat. He barely rested his hands in time before Deku was lurching to yank off his shoes to jump onto the stone ledge along the dock. Katsuki signed, "Calm down." A second before Deku skidded off the dock and into the water. Deku's hands flew back with a shriek. He caught his elbow on the edge of the dock, his heels slipping off the rock and plunging into the deep end. Katsuki winced the instant he heard the back of Deku's head thud graciously on a wooden plank. "Oh, fuck!" Deku whined, curling up onto the rock with a hand on his head. Katsuki hid the flat side of his pinky against his forehead. Deku huffed out a pained laugh as he tripped forward. He groaned into his knees, both hands cradling the back of his head. Katsuki slid beside him, covering his hand over Deku's, until the idiot had the whereabouts to compose himself. Deku's immediate attention to his tail nearly sent Katsuki cowering again. It didn't feel different, but no amount of signing, "It doesn't hurt," couldn't convince Deku that this was normal. "Has this ever happened before?" Deku asked, and Katsuki shook his head. Deku crossed his legs, half submerged in the water. "Yeah, I would have read something about this at work. Has this ever happened to others, you know?" Katsuki's mind drifted away from him. His hands paused over the water, and over time, genuinely sunk down. They hadn't talked about the others like him. nor did he ever expect them to. Deku had once been hopeful, but respectful of the fact that Katsuki didn't seem to articulate the words for mother or father that hadn't been in his vocabulary for the better part of a decade. It's okay if you don't want to, Deku reassured, as Katsuki's blank expression gave way to a deep-set, painful frown. Deku's smile looked just as strained as Katsuki's chest, which still stilled in the silence. I don't remember, he confessed. So much of his life before capture was soft and rose-tinted, bleary like a distant dream. He could only remember a vague sense of unintelligible plot, but never specifics, never the faces of the people closest to him, never his home or the sky. Had he ever seen the sky before then? He was sure he had stargazed before, and the constellations were nothing like what Deku showed him these days. There's a lot of fish that change colors, Deku reassured him more than Katsuki, who continued to frown at the water. The comment left a sour taste in his mouth. It might have to do with the fact that you've been spending more time in the sun. Lots of shallow species are darker to protect themselves from the sun, or for camouflage. Piranhas turn black as a sign of sexual maturity, and this isn't to say, I mean, you do carry a lot of characteristics of a piranha, but there isn't. Most of the research done on piranhas have been red-bellied piranhas. That doesn't include red eyes, sargeries, or, Stop, Katsuki says, his voice hoarse. It felt like sandpaper against his throat, but it did wonders to shut Deku up, so it was worth it. His eyes followed the dips of Deku's Adam apple. He wanted to poke it, but refrained. There were more important matters at hand, which he articulated with a sweet gesture. Sorry for the other day. He expected Deku to dismiss it quickly, or insist that it was fine. The idiot, however, was a goddamn mastermind. Katsuki couldn't be sure if it was healthy, the way that Deku's face turned bright red. It turned Katsuki's gills fluttered, the way they often did when he was flustered. No amount of oxygen could prepare him for Deku's response. I really didn't mind. I was just surprised. It's only fair that you get to examine me after everything that's happened. Deku took a deep breath, overwhelming breath. When he released it, he did so with a reassuring smile. You're welcome to look whenever you like, Kachan. Katsuki's hands, unintentionally raised, moving under the explicit aforementioned Deku just gave him. Katsuki curled his hands into fists just under the surface, and judging the way Deku's eyes dropped, Katsuki could be assured that it wasn't subtle. Deku reached for the waistbands of his shorts. He did so in steps, first. His hands rested on the elastic, then his thumb hooked under it. Katsuki was unaware just how intentionally he was staring. He wasn't blinking, his gaze intense, resting on Izuku's pelvis. Okay, we're cutting that chapter off there, and we're not going to read the rest of that chapter. Nothing happens. They just... things are pulled out. One thing is pulled out. They talk and that's it. But I'm not reading the rest of that. If you want, you can, of course, go into the actual chapter, but I'm not reading this. I'm scared. Why is chapter 5 called It's an Innocent Science Experiment, I Swear, for Science? There's probably going to be another area I'm going to have to skip there. Okay. There's going to be multiple moments where I'm going to skip certain areas just because I am going to skip certain areas. Point blank. I don't need to give you guys an explanation. Alright? Alright. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.